My name's Aunty Betty McGrady. I'm a Gunggari woman from a little place called Mitchell in southwest Queensland. I was born and raised on the Yumba. Now, Yumba in my language means home. Now, it was a reserve, not a mission. So the people who controlled the reserve were the native police. And I've been told that one of those native police officers was my uncle, Uncle Jim Jackson. In relation to my heritage, on my dad's side, I knew my grandmother, but I never knew my grandfather, because my grandmother came to live with us when we moved into the Yumba way back in the day. The Yumba was built in 1938. I was born in 1950, so it was established a few years before I was born. But I know that my grandmother moved into one of those timber dwellings when the Yumba was constructed or opened up. She was one of the local Aboriginal people that lived around, in the area in St. George. She had two sisters, I believe. One sister married a white man and had children to him, but she later died in childbirth, so it was my grandmother's responsibility then to marry that white man and raise her sister's children.
Ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma nga dinga wunyende, wongan go, wongan go, wongan go, wongan go. Adinda digarandala, manga digarandala, yanda rinda rinda re, yuga de buga buga, yongan jonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende. Ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma nga dinga wunyende, wongan go, wongan go, wongan go, wongan go. Adinda digarandala, manga digarandala, yanda rinda rinda re, yuga de buga buga, yongan jonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende, wongan gonga dadi ma manga dinga wunyende.
And the people who now live on Woodland Station open the gates to us and afford us the opportunity to visit the property if we have connection. When the property was sold, my grandmother was turfed off the property because it was illegal for Aboriginal people to own land. They had no rights to land, to own it anyway. And so when they were turfed off there, they went to Mitchell and lived in a fringe dwellers camp until the Yumba was opened up. She moved on the Yumba. I grew up on the Yumba until I was 16. My life there was pretty happy. Like I said to some people now, that I could sleep in a different house every night, and my mother knew I was safe because we were all one mob. We all supported one another. And sometimes I got mistaken for children, other people's children. They were playing up, and I copped the strap. So it was, if I played up, then whosever house it was had the right to chastise me. I didn't like school. I spent most of my time in the Maranoa River. I loved the water. And I had a dear friend, Robert Munn, Bob Munn, he was called. We spent countless hours in the river, just roaming up and down the river, catching fish, catching crayfish, whatever we could do. We spent most of our time in the river. And Bob was the main person involved in our native title claims, and I want to thank him for the work that he's put in. He's now passed on, and I acknowledge the work that he's done in securing our native title rights. I wagged school a lot, I know. My mother used to chastise me all the time for not going to school when she found out. She didn't find out all the time, but when she found out, I'd cop a flogging. And when I remember my sister having to do my chores when I wasn't there, and she'd get really angry with me. It's your turn to make the fire. It's your turn to cut the wood. So she'd always chastise me. Where were you? Why weren't you here? And so, she wasn't very happy with that, but, it went in one ear and out the other. So I kept on doing what I wanted to do, just roaming up and down the river. when I was 16, I did go to school, and when I started school at the state school in Mitchell, my first teacher was Mrs. Matthews, and I always remember that lady. She encouraged me so much to do well, and I did. I did well under her tutelage, but when I moved into a higher class, that was it. I just lost the plot. Well, in its heyday, about 30 families, and it was in the initial stages. There was only 6 timber dwellings built, so other families that moved in lived in tents or shacks or whatever they could construct. But like I said, it was happy times. We all supported one another. No, I lived in a timber house, yeah. But Dad had to add to it, like a veranda and a bough shed and stuff like that, whatever, just to provide more shelter for Mum, Dad and 8 kids. So I was number 4 in 8 children, and we were all raised there. I think before we came to the Yumba, I think my 2 brothers were born out on one of the pastoral companies. Not too sure, but 1941, I know that the Aboriginal school, my brother went to the Aboriginal school there on the Yumba. But by the time I was eligible for school, I think it was, 1956 or something that I started school. And Mrs. Matthew was a great teacher. And then I lost the interest because the teacher, didn't actually spend as much time as I thought they should. And I drifted. I don't know how I got through to year 8 or how I even got to high school. And I only stayed to year 9 and half of year 10, I think, and 66. So year 10, then my mother said, if you're not going to go to school, there's nothing here for you. You need to go to Brisbane and stay with your sister because, you probably find work down in the city. A lot of my culture, as I said, my mother was removed when she was 6 years old, so she had no idea of where she came from, who she was. So it was my grandmother on my father's side that started teaching us culture. But she said that if she was caught teaching us this culture, then we would be removed, not her. And so she would only speak it at night, but only little bits.
Nawelu, Paluku Mandana, Paluku Mandalku. Bardu is a river, see? Barduku, Mandalku. Oku Mandana. Wait a minute. Bardu, Oku Mandana.
And my sister Peggy and I, we used to sleep in the same bed with my grandmother. So she used to call us her hot water bottles. So one in the front and one at the back. And sometimes a dog down the bottom of the bed. Just basically words, She'd speak words, but I mean, with everything else that was going on, a lot of the words have been lost. There's an attempt now to revive the language, and I believe there's a Gunggari dictionary. I don't know whether it's out, but it's being compiled or been compiled. But I have had sessions with the State Library in terms of reviving the language, and sometimes some of the words that I know my father and my grandmother spoke are not what's in the dictionary. So different interpretations, but it's at least it's there. Yeah, at least there's some semblance of our language there. My daughter works at Queensland Health. She's a child nurse, and she finds it. Some of our people are speaking the language, and some of the health nurses are scared to engage. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to approach them because they could be speaking to me in language and I don't know what they're saying. So there's a tendency to not engage. particularly with people who have cultural knowledge. The elders, most of the elders, they're scattered, yeah. I mean, we lost our icon, who was Aunty Ethel. I think it was this year. Bob's already, Bob's gone. Some of those people who had the knowledge, all our old grandmothers. I remember my mother used to go and visit and sit with some of these women because she didn't know language. She didn't grow up with it. She was raised in a Church of England hostel by the nuns, and anything, Aboriginal was frowned upon. But when she was living on the Yumba, she used to go and talk to the old women, and she used to speak language with them, but she wouldn't teach us. So again, it was that fear of us being taken. I remember, after I was married and had a couple of children, I tried to ask her about her life, and she wouldn't speak. She wouldn't, no, it's, got nothing to do with you. What do you want to know for? It was a painful time in her life because of the harsh treatment she got. There were older siblings, two, Aunty Esther, and a brother. So there's 3 girls and 3 boys, and I think Mum was the second eldest daughter. But if I couldn't find information from Mum, I'd talk to Aunty Esther, because we were living in Brisbane and she was living in Chinchilla. Had to drive to Chinchilla to, spend time with her. And Mum occasionally visited Aunty Esther. I remember once the 3 sisters got together in Chinchilla. So I was part of the transportation that took them there. And, they spent the day together. There was no sadness. Sometimes they recall bad times and they cry. But there's none of that this day. They were just happy to spend time together. Just talk about old times. Yeah. No, I wasn't allowed to sit in on those conversations.
Right.
This is grown-ups talk, this is elders talk. Even though I was an adult myself. Yeah. You don't need to be here. This is just between us. And, it was their lives that they were sharing. And they didn't want me to be part of it. They didn't want me to know about it. So I didn't sit in on any of those sessions. Although when I did come to Brisbane, I went and stayed with Mum's sister's Aunty Maud. And I know that when they were all taken, they would have had Aboriginal names. But when they went into the Church of England hostel there, they were all given English names. And so eldest girl got Esther, Mum got Ruby, and the youngest one, Aunty Maud, she got Maud. And they were all given birth dates, Supposedly, well, you look like you're about this old, so I'm going to give you this date. I think Aunty Esther Mum got April Fool's Day. And Aunty Maud, I think, got the Queen's birthday. I can't remember. I think Aunty Esther was probably around Easter or something, because it was those, it coincided with Christianity. So they were all given birth dates and new names. I have no idea. I just know it was a Church of England hostel in Charleville. Mum and Dad met on a pastoral property. Mum, when she was 16, was farmed out to a pastoral company, and Dad was working on that, supposedly. This is what I'm told. And they married. And I can't remember. I know it's all written down somewhere, but I can't remember now. Afghan heritage. That's all I know, is that my Aboriginal grandmother married an Afghani camel herder way back in the day. And that's the 6 children that were born and then taken to that Church of England hostel. I know that when they got together and they travelled the Unadata Trail to avoid the authorities. And then 6 children later, they caught up with them and the whole 6 were taken. Again, it was the reason to take the children, because the marriage, well, it wasn't a marriage, it was just a union, wasn't it? They had no way of registering a marriage. Yeah, even registering the births, because if they tried to do that, the child would be taken. And so they avoided them, and six children later, they caught up with them, and the whole lot were taken. So that's what my mother told me. According to my mother, it was done before they left the hospital. Yeah. Any child that was born at the hospital was registered at the hospital. I know previously that my grandmother used to birth children on the riverbank. So when I came to Brisbane, I met up with this old girl, Aunty Janie Arnold. She was on the board of the Aboriginal Legal Service where I worked. And she asked me my name, and I said Jackson, and she said, "Oh, do you know old Granny Jackson?" I said, that's my granny. Well, she birthed me on the banks of the Maranoa River. So, 50, 60 years later, I'm running into someone that's been birthed by my grandmother. My grandmother supposedly had a status. She was a midwife. She was birthing kids on the river. She was also involved in the church, and was sort of like a deaconess of the church, because she had a lot of knowledge about it, apparently. So, yeah. But my mother also, because she was raised in the Church of England hostel, she, imposed that on us. I remember growing up in the Yumba, and every Sunday the minister would come down to deliver Sunday school. Church services were delivered under the pepperina tree in Mitchell, and Mum used to send us all up to sit under the pepperina tree, up under the pepperina tree, and listen to the Sunday school, messages. I remember one day Mum got sick, and someone has to take the kids up there. She put a hat on my brother and sent him. He hated it. But, such was her commitment to us being raised in that faith. And I said after, because I even got married in the Church of England. And I sent my kids to Sunday school, because it was only hop, step and a jump, 5 minutes walk to the church. But it was a Sunday and you could have some free time. So they loved going to the church. Yeah. But it was, because it was Sunday school, it was, not strict. And also an opportunity to have a feed. Food was it's still a good draw card, isn't it? Food.
It certainly is.
I always say that up until, even after my children were going to Sunday school, when I became a grandmother, then I realised that Christianity was a form of control. If you don't do this, then this is going to happen. And so I stopped my kids, not stopped them, but didn't force them to engage in Christianity at all. They made up their own mind. I used to go to a temple at Rochdale, the Buddhist temple. I was exploring, basically. And, I've been to the synagogue, the Jewish synagogue. I've been to a lot of different faiths, the Ming community in Logan, the ICB, Islamic College, I go to functions there. But it's all about understanding, trying to understand their faith, because I still hadn't found my own spirituality. It took me a long time to connect with my spirituality, with the spirit world. And it's only in the last, when did I do the dreaming? So about 15, 20 years. Because I've lived in Logan for 40 years, and I took all my grandkids back to country to do their dreaming, and it was that time of my life that I became more connected to my spirituality. I think it was after we got well, the native title claim was lodged in the 80s. And it took us a long time to actually, go through the courts and get determination or recognition as prior custodians of the land. That journey sort of connected me a little bit more with my own culture and my own spirituality. I started then learning, because I was, at that time too, I was delivering the cultural capability training to Queensland Health staff. And I had to know that story or that information to be able to educate, Queensland Health staff and how they interacted with Aboriginal and Torres Strait people. And so I learnt a lot through that as well, and that strengthened my resolve to follow my spirituality. And then I started learning that, the process for us, the responsibility of Aboriginal people was to always care for the land. And we had to have a process where we did that through ceremony, let's say. And so all our children were given a dreaming, which meant that they had the responsibility of protecting that dreaming and to ensure that it always stayed on country. It never became extinct. But since we've been moved off country, we've lost so much, And my whole, I think 11 grandchildren, 10 because 2 didn't come last time. 2 boys didn't want to come to country last time, so they stayed. But they will eventually. If they don't come to country, then I'll just do it in the backyard. And I've told them, you're the only 2 that haven't had your dreaming, so, it's your responsibility to step up and go through the process. So it's looking at the characteristics of the child itself. And sometimes, even before the child is born, mum might come across something that will startle her, or she might have a dream about something, and it's imprinted on the child. And so the child will, when it's born, then will display those characteristics of that animal, plant, bird, whatever it is. And when the elders or the aunties or uncles recognise those traits, then, that's the child of such and such. And so I've got a few different ones, And again, it's the aunties that get together and decide on the girls, and the uncles that decide on the boys, what sort of characteristics they display that matches with whatever's on country. And it's got to be something from our country. It can't be something from somebody else's country. They're like one of those marine creatures or something. When we're freshwater people, we can't have a marine creature, so we focus on what's on country. And so, because that's the country that we need to protect and make sure that our things are still on country. That's our responsibility.
How about your own dreaming?
I never got one. Never got one. No. And again, see, because my mother wasn't raised as an Aboriginal child. She was raised as a white child in a hostel. I had a lot of conversations with my dad, though. But Dad drugged me all over the country teaching me bushcraft. So I've learned a lot about bushcraft and, even later in the day, mechanics and all that sort of stuff. He had me fixing cars and everything. So I was closer with my dad because Mum didn't want to talk about a lot of stuff. So I spent a lot of time with Dad roaming the countryside, exploring and looking at the different things. I've learned how to divine for water. He made me learn that. Tan a kangaroo hide. I can do that. Track a porcupine. I can do that. Hunt the widgety grubs in the trees, This is all about survival and I've not had the opportunity to hand it down to either my sons or my grandsons.
Mari manda nang bade bunari we gotta take that out. You Martin. Ilang Mari bulari. Ila mari bulari ngalkana. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. How would you say? Two men walking along talking.
Mari bulari kumandana ngalkalpai.
Bula manta yugana. Bula.
Bula manta yokana.
Bula. Manta yugana. Ondu mandas walk away. Yudi mal mean by the meat. You might know much, but one is ondu mandaya. And if there's more, it's ondu mandaya. Okumandaya. Okumandaya. Okumandaya.
Okumandaya.
Come here, Okumandaya. One bindaya, if it's more, well no, just to say, just put bindaya. Binda ngachunda. Binda ngachunda, sit down with me. Don't say. Ada bindaya. Ada bindaya. But ada mean don't.
Undu manda edalu jubende.
Wait a minute.
That means go.
You can both say it both ways.
Well,
Undu mandaya or ada bindaya. Or say undu mandaya. Undu mandaya. Go away means. Undu means go away.
Ada bindaya, don't sit down.
Ada bindaya, don't sit down. Undu mandaya. Oli bamba ngaya bindala. Oli bamba. Muku muku. Muku wakuda. That's what you call wakuda. Muku, that's knee. Morku. What would you put? Morku. Warkodala, I suppose. Warkodala. Moko, this is moko, you know?
Yeah.
Moko, moko. Morku warkodala, I suppose you call warkodala. Moko, that's knee. Morku. What would you put? Morku. Warkodala, I suppose. Warkodala.
Wakadala.
Warkodala.
Wakadala.
Warkodala, you got to put that in your shell. Moko, war. Moko, that's moko's knee. Warkodala.
Wakadala.
Same as this. If this went cook, I'll say Dina Warkodala.
Wakadala.
That's my feet went. My mother went, I'll just say mother, man, Warkodala. It's all Warkodala, what a crook.
Yeah. How would you say my foot sore from walking for a long way?
Dina. Put this is Dina, you know.
Yeah.
Dina. Walking, Dina. Dina Warkodala, I suppose.
Dina Wakadala, yeah, that means it's sore. You say it's sore from walking too fast.
Dina Warkodala. Waiting is a